Hi, this is Elaine Bateman for Indie Author Magazine, and I'm here today with Kate Pickford, and we're going to be talking, among other things, about editing. Hi, Kate.
I'm very happy to be here. Hello.
It's lovely to be speaking to you today. So give us some background. How did you get started in this crazy industry?
So I can't remember not writing. I wrote papers for people at school. I wrote papers for people at college. Then when I got a job, so of course, a couple of years ago, there was this scandal about people are writing papers for students at universities, shock horror. 20 years ago in Japan, there was a big move. The yen was doing really well. And so Japanese companies were sending their businessmen to American universities, but they had to write an entrance paper. And so I would go and I would interview them. And then I would write the why my hero is Dokugan Ryu Masamune, samurai, blah, 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 blah. And so, I got these mostly men. I can't think of a single woman that went to business school. So, they went to Wharton and Harvard and they got a full ride. So that there was a bit of, an incentive for the universities to take them because there was so much money. But I was writing their entrance papers for them. And then my wife, Ginger, went to NYU grad film. And so she and I started writing films together. And it became really clear that we were the people to go to if you're, I just stopped myself from swearing, yes, if your screenplay wasn't quite coming together. So that was when I started script doctoring for people. And, we made films for a while, which is a great way to lose money. And then I started writing novels for people. So I built this reputation for being able to fix things that were broken. So I did a lot of script doctoring that led to ghostwriting. And then finally, I found a publisher who was looking for writers who wanted to write post-apoc, and I interviewed with him. And then I started writing under a pen name. I started writing post-apoc under JJ Pike. And then finally, in the last year, I finally got up the courage to start writing things under my own name. So I started, I don't know, a long time ago. and then again, like I've got these restarts. I've got lots of restarts. But really my background was as a script doctor, a developmental editor, and a ghostwriter.
Right. So about what other genres do you write apart from post-apoc?
So really, I will write anything that anyone will pay for. And so when I was writing for trad authors, they pay you enough that you can do the research. So you just immerse yourself in a genre. And that tended to be more upmarket, whereas the indie stuff I do tends to be more commercial. I haven't written literary fiction. So, of the three tiers, I tend to be upmarket or commercial. And so I wrote a lot of sort of women's fiction, historical fiction, mysteries. I've got an award-winning mystery series, paranormal romance, lit RPG. What else am I doing? Oh, I'm writing a steamy rom-com at the moment. So it really was, what is going to pay the bills? And I interviewed with someone a couple of years ago, and they were like, we're looking for a ghostwriter. What do you do? And I'm like, I'm willing to do anything, and I'll do the research. Sci-fi. I've got a big sci-fi series out as well. So I said, the only things that I can't do are lit RPG, and I write terrible sex scenes. Like, they did a thing. It was fun. And so they hired me to write a lit RPG series, and they're like, oh, we'll take care of the game stuff. I wrote a shifter series, and I think it was the best sex scene I've ever written, but it ended up on the cutting room floor because apparently you're not supposed to be funny. You're not supposed to be funny about it, but I thought it was really funny, but apparently not. I called it the bears because they were bear shifters. Sorry. sorry, Lily said surgery, so she's very, very clingy at the moment. I don't think that's going to work for us, love. You just come in. Yes, so the answer is anything and everything, but my passion goes to post-apoc sci-fi mystery. Yeah.
Have you finished the post-apoc series?
I am writing book 10 of the series. So I wrote 8 books pretty close together, and my publisher said they will riot if that's the last book. And what I didn't realize at the time was I had written a very upmarket ending. So in an upmarket ending, you can have some ambiguity about what happens next. So the hero gathers everything together and is walking off into the sunset and may or may not succeed. In commercial fiction, you wrap it up. There's a conclusion where you know what happened. And so he was like, well, I don't think you're done. So then I wrote book 9, and I'm either wrapping it up in 1 book or I'm wrapping it up in 3 books. I don't know yet because I'm a pantser.
So that's interesting that you're a pantser.
So I don't know if have you talked to Errata's Barry Hutchison's stuff. So Barry has talked about this as well, that I don't see images in my head. And there are quite a lot of writers who don't see images at all. And so when people are like, oh, the characters just turn up in your head and then they start doing things and you just write it down. I'm like, no, I have a sort of vague idea of what I want to write about. And then I go and I start writing and they turn up through the words. It's called aphantasia. If you don't see things, it's called aphantasia. And so because I've read so much and because I've worked so much on other people's stories, I've got a really clear sense of structure. I think structure is just part of how I think. And so I don't tend to, in fact, I did end up in the post-apoc series, I didn't end up having to do some plotting for book 7 because it got a little bit complicated in book 7. But mostly I don't, mostly I turn up and I find out what's happening when I'm writing. But of course, as a developmental editor, you have to know structure. I worked for a company that hired developmental editors, and you worked with clients. I taught the course Story Genius that's based on Lisa Cron's book Story Genius, and you have to know structure. And now the stuff that I'm working on with the Doomscribblers, these writers who are helping me raise funds for my brother's mother-in-law, I'm teaching them the hero's journey. So I'm teaching them that structure. I don't know if any of them know that I'm a pantser because I make them do outlines. They're like, no, I can't do an outline. I'm like, we've got to, because we're writing in teams. So it's like a television room, where you write in teams, and it's really hard discipline. If you're not used to having a co-writer, it's a really hard discipline. But I think everyone is, enjoying it in a boot camp kind of way. So I'm a pantser who understands plotting.
Right. So tell me more about this charity stuff that you're doing.
Oh, so my the pandemic had just sort of kicked off, and I think Craig was doing his 5-minute focus things, and I decided to put it out there that I would edit the first pages of the first 3 writers that got in touch with me and sent me their pages. I would edit their first pages to get them to being unputdownable. So do you understand what an opening hook looks like? Do you understand, how to make your first chapter compelling? Do you understand where the inciting incident is? And I think that's really changed, because in traditional fiction, so in upmarket and commercial, in upmarket and literary fiction, the inciting incident is quite far on. There's this world building, like ordinary life happens before the inciting incident. But I think because of KU and because of the look inside feature, and because readers have access to millions of books now, it isn't this gated community where you've only got rich white dudes who've got a trust fund who are able to write books. People can write books, and you can read the first pages. And if you don't grab your reader in those first pages, if you don't have your inciting incident pretty close to the beginning, in post-apoc, it's on the first page. And by genre, it's in different places, but it's always, so there are lots of people who say that you can't teach structure to a mixed group of writers because structure is genre dependent. And I completely disagree. I completely disagree, because I think that tropes are genre dependent, but the underlying structure is going to be something that you make a choice about and that you work around. But, you know, it's like building a house. You've got to have walls and a roof for it to be a house. It can be any shape. So if you're writing PNR, you know, it's going to be a castle with like sexy turrets and things like that. And if you're writing horror, it's going to be, you know, a Stephen King-esque hooded thing with overhanging. So I think that structure, the underpinnings of structure are constant. Where what happens changes by genre. So the inciting incident is a really easy thing to understand. So do you kick off, does everything go blam on page 1 like post-apoc, or is it, you know, 25 pages in before we get to the cute neat if we're writing romance, you know? So that's going to be the inciting incident. So I think that the pacing and the tropes are genre dependent, but I don't think structure is genre dependent. And I'm a bit of an outlier, but John Truby wouldn't be able to teach his courses, which are built around the hero's journey, if he didn't agree with me. Yes, John Truby agrees with me.
How do you know when a story works or doesn't?
So if you're reading your own stuff, or if you're beta reading for someone else, or you're editing, if you start to drift, if you find yourself, so, you know, the prerequisites that you are decently fed, you've had some sleep, you want to read, this is a genre that you love or like, then the places where I'm lucky enough now that I don't tend to work with writers who are who still get lost in language. So early writers, sometimes you're like, what is that paragraph about? I have no idea what you're saying. I actually can't understand what's going on, which is quite common. It's quite common in early writers. But if you find that your attention starts to wander, if you find you can put the book down and not want to go back to it, if you put the book down, and this is all about writing good hooks, right? Compelling characters, high stakes, good hooks. You can get away with not having a terrific premise. I mean, of course, you want a premise, but you can get away with having a really standard premise, you know, that if you look at genre, premises are all pretty much lumped together, you know, post-apoc, the world is ending. The premise is X happened and the world ends. Romance, two people meet and fall in love. They hate each other. They love each other. They hate each other. They love each other. Oh, they're together now. So you've got the premise. The next layer of what are the personal and professional stakes, the higher the stakes are, the more likely you are to keep reading, and the more likely you are to invest in those characters. But if you've got muddy writing, if you've got weak hooks, if you've got a low stakes set of personal and professional stakes, if you haven't got a really great premise, and if you've got flabby chapters that aren't driving things forward, then you're going to stop reading. And you know pretty soon about characters, you know whether or not characters are working. And I would say for me, I know within 2 pages probably of reading a new writer, I know whether or not they've got control of language. within a chapter, I know whether or not they've got control of character. And within a couple of chapters, I know, okay, we've got the stakes on the page, and we've got something that's driven forward. One of the big things that I see, so I'm sure that everybody has read Pixar's great stuff about plotting. Depending on whether or not you plot from outside in or inside out, I think makes a big difference as to whether or not you are going to have something that is so compelling that the reader can't put it down. So if you plot from the outside in, or you write, if you're not a plotter, if you're a pantser, if you write from the outside in, so stuff happens and then more stuff happens, and then more stuff happens. So it's all coming from the outside. It's all plot happening to the character. If that's outside in, inside out is something happens and the character reacts, which sets the next domino in motion. So it's because this happened, that happened, and because that happened, and so that happened. So if you build a cause and effect trajectory where what the character is doing propels the next plot point, so it's coming from the character, that makes something unputdownable. My brand is all about being unputdownable. So that's why I talk about hooks and stakes and whether or not you've got this cause and effect trajectory. But you know pretty soon if something isn't working, if the writing is flabby, if you know the characters just aren't alive on the page. So, and the thing is, it's fixable. This is a learnable craft.
Your experience of editing the stories for Hellcats. The Hellcats anthology.
Oh, so yeah, I started answering that question, then I went off on a big tangent, didn't I? So beginning of the pandemic, I started doing this reading. Then Craig invited me on his 5-minute focus. And then I thought, you know what, I could start just doing that freebie classes for people. Anybody who wants to watch them can come and see me talk. I tried to keep it under 10 minutes, see me talk about something that is related to the craft. And then I found out that my brother's wife's mother was being bullied out of her home. So it's a long, very horrible story. We tried to stay on the positive side about it. But basically, a non-blood relative has bribed his way through the courts in Armenia. And the courts have sided with him to say that he owns a portion of the house that she lives in. She is 80. Her husband died after a few years with Alzheimer's that wiped out any savings that they had in their life. So she still works full time. And for some reason, this bullying man just hit me in that place. And, you know, we were all in lockdown and we couldn't get out. And I put the word out. I said, you know, are there any writers out there who would like to come together with me and write an anthology of short stories to raise money for this woman? And the response was overwhelming. There were 81 writers who wrote for free. And the book was called Hellcats. I bought a random cover. I was just, you know, flicking through covers late at night. I'm like, I'm getting that one. So I bought this cover and decided that it was going to be Hellcats, which are stories of recompense and redemption. Recompense, reckoning, and redemption. And all these writers came together. And then I don't really know where Josie Clement came from, but Josie Clement just sort of appeared out of the mists as this conquering heroine and said, I'll help you, which is awesome because me and computers, it's like if I touch it, it's probably going to break. And she's like, oh, no, I know that. And then the Coronitas, they just sort of coalesced around it and came together. And Crystal became the editor-in-chief. So suddenly there's this back office and they're doing all the proofing, and I did the developmental editing. But some people, I think probably the biggest, like one writer did 6 rewrites to get that story right for Hellcats. And they just kept working. I kept sending, you know, because there were a lot of newbie writers. And so I'd send them notes and say, you know, let's work on this bit now because this isn't quite working. And it did really well. We've got great, really, really great reviews. 2 writers, their agents are developing their short stories into longer stories. So 2 of them have now got series that came out of those short stories. The rights have reverted back to the writers. So I think people are using those short stories as reader magnets, as the kind of, the thing that you use short stories for. We raised about $8,000 off the back of that anthology. We only need to raise 75,000. So, we're really close. So I decided to do another one. So Hellhounds is up next. And we've got a bunch of writers who sent their stories in. Meanwhile, my publisher said, why don't we just write a series and I will donate all of my earnings from that series to your sister-in-law's mother. And I said, well, why don't we've got all these writers who want to write. Why don't we see if they want to come and write with us? And so then I interviewed writers. I call them the Doomscribblers because we're writing post-apoc. And there was a selection process and it was quite stringent. And but then I told people, if you are in the room, you're in the room for a reason. And if you are willing to put the work in, I am willing to keep teaching you until you can write post-apoc with a hero's journey in close third. I think only about, of the 31 people who started out, there's only been about 10 nervous breakdowns. So, we're in good shape and we're going to end up with 30 books. So of the teams, we're going to end up with co-written books. The first few books have been to the beta readers. None of them know that they are multi-author books. And the money from that, from the Doomscribblers, that's all going to go into the fund to try and save her house until we hit that limit. And then I hope, then the writers will make some money.
That's brilliant. And how is Errata?
I don't know if I shared this with you yet. So she's had this court process going on, and she got COVID. She was hospitalized. She came out. She, even at 80, she made it, which is really, really fantastic. And then about a month ago, somebody knocked on her front door, and he said, "You've got to leave." And she said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I just bought this house." She said, "No, you didn't." So we think, we can't prove this, but we think that the nephew, who's the one who's bullying her, had a friend in the auction house, and they agreed together that they would put it on the market. Nobody told her that they were putting it on the market. And so her lawyer has challenged that. It's gone back to the courts, and they were already in a challenge. They were challenging it over how much it was worth. He'd hired somebody and it was way high. So we're back in court. Somebody thinks they've bought her house. She's still living it. I don't know how. I would be a wreck. I mean, if there's a way to quickly lose weight, stress, I would be so stressed. But she's very gracious. And, like my brother and his wife, her faith is very strong. And so she believes that it's going to be okay. And I'm just going to keep working until we raise enough money that she's got enough money to find a place to live. That's my goal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hopefully that.
Thank you for being part of that. I really appreciate it. And I enjoyed your story with John. What was that like, writing that with John? Was that fun?
It was. It was different. It was strange to lose that kind of control. You know what I mean?
Right.
We kind of would have an idea, and then we'd send the story forwards and backwards, and he'd make some changes to something, and I'd be like, but that's not what I wrote, and then I'd find myself doing it to him.
I think
he could have put that better, and so we do the same kind of thing to each other. But it wasn't bad, actually. I think it would be a different experience if we hadn't been on in such a rush. If it weren't for the timescales and we'd taken our time with it, we would probably have had a very different experience. I think. So, but we've both said it's not off the cards to do something.
Oh, that would be great, because you're both so funny. I think you're two of the funniest people I know. I love you're a quipper and he's a ranter. And between the two of you, I'm like, oh, they commented. It's going to be funny. It's going to be funny. I think you'd make a great team. I think you'd make a really great team.
I have to mention that to him. We're both struggling with the amount of stuff we've got already, but yeah, there's always time, I think. Or there's always time in the future, one hopes.
Yeah.
So, thoughts on self-editing?
Gosh, that is a so I think the people who can write a story that's coherent, I think they are bleeping unicorns. That my early stuff was incomprehensible, absolutely incomprehensible, because I've got so much going on in my head, and I am so comfortable with jumping from A to F. And there are so many readers who are like, well, where's B, C, D, and E? I'm not stepping off A until you give me the next stepping stone. They want you to build these people. They want you to build the world. They want you to show them what it looks like. And so I had to really learn it. I really had to study. Feedback is, I think, absolutely central. If you are going to self-edit, build yourself a team, go find people who write in your genre, find people who understand your genre, so they understand tropes and tone and pacing, which are the big things that are going to make a difference, and have them read for you at the alpha level. So alpha readers are really important. And then there are the free tools out there. You know, there's Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly. They are a little bit stick in the mud because, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was at school, you know, there are no dangling participles. You do not have dangling participles. They are absolutely forbidden. But, you know, we don't talk like that. And a lot of commercial fiction is really, it plays with the vernacular. It's not turn of the century Dickens. It's not Austen. It's written in a modern idiom. And in a modern idiom, you have dangling participles and you have sentence fragments. And so the automated things will pick you up on stuff where you have to decide that you are the boss of your story. And I think that's the most important thing for the writer is if you do, you didn't ask me this question, but if you do hire an editor, they're working for you, but they are also in your corner rooting for you. They want this to be as good as possible. But when the feedback comes back to you, you then need to understand what the feedback is trying to do. And then you get to make a decision. Do I do that? Do I go that way? Or do I go this way? But you really need to understand what you're trying to do. And if somebody gives you feedback, what they're actually saying is, that didn't land for me. And one voice is, you know, it's not a data set. It's one voice. But if you've got a team and you've got a team of people who said, yeah, they might not be able to tell you why something isn't working, but if they're not connecting, you need to go in and investigate why it isn't working. I think you have to have it at an absolute minimum. I think you have to have it proofed. I mean, there's always going to be typos that slip through. It's not possible. Even in the trad world, it's like, what, one in, I don't know, there's a number out there that the acceptable number of typos. British audiences and American audiences are quite different in their tolerance for errors, what they think are errors. I think it's because British readers and TV viewers, series viewers, film viewers, they're used to American coming at them because the market is so heavily skewed to American stuff, whereas American readers watch, read, listen to a lot more American stuff. So as an English person, I still have Britishisms. I've been here for 20 years. I have got a team with somebody who just looks for Britishisms because the American reading public will skewer you for what they think is an error, when in fact it's a mode of speech, or we punctuate differently. Americans and Brits punctuate differently, and they will ding you for it, and they will give you a 2-star, 3-star review, or, you know, some of them, it depends on their tolerance for errors. They'll just say, I saw a typo in the first chapter, and that's so sloppy, I stopped reading. And they really are that stringent about it. Not everyone, obviously, but a lot of people. So I would say you need to get your manuscript proofed at minimum. But there are lots of ways to do that. There are genre groups where you can go and start really making friends, not using other people, but you and I know this because we've been going to conferences long enough that you find your tribe. You find the people who are writing the same genre as you. I mean, if you're lucky enough, you go to Bali and somebody brings you pork pies and you get to eat pork pies in your room. For anybody who doesn't know, Elaine and I both went to a conference in Bali, and she knew that I love pork pies and can't get them in America. So she brought me an entire 6-pack and I ate all of them on my own. They were delicious. So you find your people, and my team, we do swaps. So we are, we all come from a trad background, but we're all now writing commercial fiction. So I've got a team that edits my stuff before it goes to my publisher, and the publishing house, their editor doesn't touch my stuff. They've got a beta reader team that are all housed on beta books, and they're really good at catching typos. This is an absolutely fantastic book on editing. And if you're going to self-edit, I cannot recommend this highly enough. I didn't write it. I didn't ghostwrite it. I don't get a kickback for mentioning this book. I just happen to love this book. And it says it's intuitive. I don't really understand the title because it's not intuitive at all. It's really like, this is what the rule is, and this is why you need to understand. So I was really interested this year to find out that a lot of people understand that there are rules. You're not supposed to use many adverbs. Well, the first time I heard that, I was like, swear word, many swear words, until I understood that adverbs are a tell. And the brain chemistry of it is that if you tell somebody something, it goes through one route, which is a really short route that goes out. But if you show them a picture, you show them the world, you don't tell them, it goes a different path in the brain, and the brain lights up and is involved. And eventually, if you do it right, the person is inside the story. They are living that story. And if you've got a lot of adverbs, you are telling the reader what to look at, and it just short circuits, it goes the wrong way. And there were a lot of people who didn't understand that you don't use adverbs unless you really must, because they're a tell. So that book, that's really good at explaining what the rules are about. And then you can decide, no, I don't care about that rule. I'm going to break that rule. We're going to do something completely different. But I would say teams are the way to go, people in your genre, and then set up parameters for what you want from your team. My question is always, would you turn the page? That's the most important question for me, is would you turn the page? Then after that, it's things like, did you slow down? Did you stop? Did you love anyone? Did you hate anyone? Because mine all comes at the developmental level. But I think that there are ways to self-edit. Just be really clear about where you are in terms of your craft. I'm fascinated by the fact that, we all get taught, well, in our upbringing, we all got taught to read and write. So a lot of people think that they can tell a story, but in fact, story requires craft. It requires you to be able to take somebody into an imaginative world and transport them into this other place. And I think, if you were a painter, or if you were a star athlete, or if you were a piano player, there is no way you would think that you could go on the global stage the first time that you sat down to a piano. You would go and you would study how to do scales. Of course, there are Mozarts. They are my unicorns. There are people who at 6 years old could hang upside down and do something backwards. They exist. They're really rare. The rest of us have to work really hard to become that thing. We have to train to become that thing. And so surround yourself with people who are doing what you're doing. Surround yourself with people who want to go where you want to go. The old adage is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. We solved that by having Yuda. Well, none of us are going to be that smart, are we? So, you know, surround yourself with people who have the same kind of goals as you do, and then be really clear about what you want from a reader and what you can do in exchange, because I don't think you can take freebies from people. I think you should give more than you take. It's my own thing, but it's possible. It is possible to self-edit. I just think it's quite hard, but I'm very biased.
You touched on conferences briefly.
Yes.
It's at conferences pretty much the world over. It's a well-established author goal to grab 5 minutes of Kate Pickford's time.
Oh,
how do you feel about that?
I feel so honoured that anybody would want to talk to me. It just seems a bit. I love talking to people about story. I really do love story. There's only been once, I think, I've been to all of the 20 Books conferences, and I'm very excited about going to NINC this year, and let's hope Vegas happens. There's only been one time where somebody tracked me for days, and then I think we spent nearly 3 hours replotting their book. I was very, very hungover at the time. I love talking story, and I'm going to try and ask, you know, compelling but hard questions like, what are the stakes and why do we care? What are the personal stakes? What are the public stakes? Tell me about the premise. So I love doing that. I really love doing that.
What's your biggest pet peeve in writing?
So my biggest pet peeve is probably, and I'm going to say it wrong because, you know, I'm only partially educated, but Deus ex machina. So the fix that happens because the plot needs a fix. So just magically everything works out, or the thing appears at exactly the right moment that hasn't been set up. So, you know, Chekhov's gun, the idea is if there's a gun on the mantelpiece in the first chapter, you better be using that by the end, because you've set it up. You've set up something specific. Everything is on the page for a reason. Plot resolutions that happen by the hand of the writer, that you can see the writer going, ooh, I need to make a thing happen. So, oh, look, all the people with all of the blowing up things all turned up at the right time, so we could go into the bank and we could blow up the bank. It makes me absolutely insane. It's like, set it up before we get there, make sure that it's make sure it's driven from the inside out, so that the character is making a decision and we've got cause and effect trajectory. Otherwise I will not be happy. My Doomscribblers would tell you that getting rid of adverbs and getting rid of dialogue tags are my big things, but that's just because we've been writing in close third. In fact, what drives me insane is plots that haven't actually been set up properly, and you lose credibility. If you can see the writer moving the pieces around on the board, you just lose faith with your readers, and they won't know necessarily why they're turning away, but they will turn away.
That's really interesting and makes me worried. And I totally thought filtering.
Oh, yes, no. Get rid of all the filtering. Get rid of the filtering language. Yes, so that she does a really good job of talking about crutch words and filtering, and what filtering is and why it matters and what the brain science is behind it. So I love all this stuff.
Where can people find you? Don't give me your street address.
I am quite literal sometimes, but that would be very like, I live in Oregon. So yes, my pen name is JJ Pike. So you can find me with my publisher under JJ Pike, and you can find me as Kate Pickford on Amazon. Don't go to my my webpage because it's under construction and it needs don't be me. Basically, don't be me. I mean, you can make a lot of money if you're me, but you could also you could have made more if you were more sensible.
Yeah, I'm already you. My
Sorry.
It's been awesome. Thank you very much for speaking with me.
Thank you for this. This was a lot of fun.
And I'm going to find the button that says stop record.